Thanks so much for staying with us here on The Real Story. We're talking tech, from your health data to your financial data. It can all be at risk online, but Connecticut has taken some major steps to protect your personal information. And here to talk about that with us is State Senator Tony Hwang. Thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here, and welcome to you as well. But in talking about data that exists in the internet and privacy factors, it really is something that is so new, because the internet and the proliferation of these controllers, which are companies that manage and somehow manipulate in some cases and sell our personal data in a marketplace such as the Amazons and the Facebooks of the world and Googles of the world. It was something that has kind of splashed onto our realization as legislatures. So last year we passed out one of the most comprehensive national laws in regards to controlling our personal data, telling these companies, which we deem as controllers, to say that if we do not want you to sell the data points, that we can prohibit you and opt out. That has never happened before, to giving consumer control. And that was in 2022. And this year we tackled data from a standpoint of data privacy, going more into the social media realm and talking about how data proliferation and misinformation could occur. And we're giving some degree of control back to the consumer to say, if this data is erroneous and we don't want it out there, that we have a time parameter to remove them. But the other critical factor that we passed this year, and I'm very proud of, is addressing social media as it impacts our young.
Yeah, and as you said, a new issue for the state legislature, the first time you've really had to tackle something like this and taken a look at it. So with those new laws that you just talked about, before we get into the social media with young people, tell me a little bit about, with the data privacy, what actually changes for residents here in Connecticut?
Well, it tells these companies that take our data in, that we as consumers readily give to them. We're saying to them that you cannot sell it. And that if we have the desire to prohibit the distribution and the repackaging of this data to outside vendors to sell to you, we're saying you can't. And it's giving some degree of control back to the consumer, and also raising greater consumer awareness that indeed the data that you're pre-offering voluntarily could be then used in a profit motive driven, or an unsavory targeting in regards to online access. So it really is something that, the incredible success of internet and social media and the proliferation of access, social media of Facebook, to allow us to connect and communicate over a broader base. But it's also brought a very insidious and very dark side as well in regards to the selling of information, the proliferation of misinformation. But most damaging is how it's impacted our mental health well-being, particularly our young.
So with mental health, let's talk a little bit about health. You co-sponsored a bipartisan law to protect patients' health data online, and we saw a local hospital here in Connecticut get targeted with a cyber attack just a couple weeks ago. So explain what this new law will do for people.
Well, part of it is establishing a cybersecurity task force. It was a bill that is 5 years in the making, and it was to create an awareness that these kind of ransomware, these kind of attacks through outside parties that steal personal data, and in some cases paralyze critical operations, in this case hospital, but also municipalities, law enforcement. These kind of ransomware are occurring all over this country, and it's happened in Connecticut. But we also do not require municipalities that have been ransomware by being hacked to disclose it. So these kind of payments have occurred in various forms, but the reality is cybersecurity comes from a consumer marketplace, personal data privacy marketplace, but it also has national security implications. Because when hackers integrate into our electric grid, they can, in essence, cripple our ability to respond. Our military complexes, our financial complexes, our personal security complexes, If that is infiltrated by unsavory terrorist organizations, they could literally cripple our country's ability to react to any adversity.
So we've seen a lot of conversations about artificial intelligence in DC, something very new to all of us. And a lot of leaders are arguing for regulation, but before regulation, there needs to be transparency. I know you were just saying with the health privacy law requiring those health organizations and hospitals to disclose if they've been hacked. How important is transparency in this conversation?
Transparency, accountability is absolutely essential. AI in its current infancy has grown by tremendous leaps and bounds, but at this point still, it is predicated on what we feed it. So if there are biases and norms that are kind of based upon the inputting that occurs, these AIs produce a norm that reflects that. So we have to be very, very conscious that AI has created a convenient and an accelerated mode and responsiveness. But nevertheless, we have to be very careful that in regards to transparency and accountability and understanding social equity and norms, that it's fair and it's reflective of all the viewpoints. Because right now, they're only as relevant and as responsive as the input of that data. So AI is powerful, and the implications could be very, very profound, positive, but in the wrong hands, it could be easily counterproductive and dangerous.
Sure, and another element of this, with this conversation about technology and privacy, is scams. I know your colleagues have said, constituents are calling them reporting scams, as well as local law enforcement, whether it's ransomware attacks, as we just mentioned, or AI phone scams. As these get more sophisticated, how does our state keep up, and what can the legislature do to combat them?
Well, I think it's common sense first. I think the adage is, if something is too good to be real, it might just not be real. But we also need to respect the technology, the ability of social media to create a smaller global community is incredible. You're able to touch base with friends from 30 years as though it was yesterday. But again, it comes with a darker side. It creates an unreasonable expectation, and that is the crux of what we're trying to get to, is having people understand technology is an important advancement in our quality of life, but we need to control it. It can't control our lives. It's all around us too. And I think sometimes it's just really important to realize technology has a limit, and its limit is only as good as people's best intention to implement it. But again, let's follow the adage. If something is too good to be real, online or anywhere else, it probably isn't real. And we need to be cautious that when we provide our personal information and data points to these kind of social media companies, that we realize that it goes out, it's for all to see.
Right. And with the expansion of social media, let's circle back to what you were saying, mental health. I like what you said about, not letting it control our lives. So what is the conversation here when it comes to mental health, as you said, specifically with teens?
Well, these social media companies are extremely sophisticated, and it's based upon algorithms. It can happen not only to young people, but to grown adults that just get first exposure to it. The algorithm of leading one likable subject matter that fits your preference and liking and inclinations feeds it constantly to kind of reinforce. And the power of that algorithm can be sold. And that's why we're trying to control the data. But I think the other critical element is to understand that it is a facet of our lives, and that it doesn't replace human interaction. It doesn't replace engagement of quality time. It's very easy. It's very easy to get lost in technology. And I think it's important to always remember, we as human beings need to be the master of our own destiny, not computers.
Absolutely, definitely an important point there. So when we're talking about holding these big tech companies accountable, is there a balance between embracing tech and having that accountability, what do you think Connecticut's next step should be in this space?
I think you said the two key words, transparency and accountability. And they have a responsibility to provide goods and services that are invaluable and makes our life much better. But we as policymakers need to understand that there are thresholds, guaranteed by the First Amendment, of course, but there are thresholds in which misinformation and the implications of what is being done goes far beyond policy, and it impacts people's lives. That's the difficult line that we must straddle in regards to how we manage these kind of policies. California and Europe has been much more aggressive. Utah has gone much more aggressively in regards to the database and privacy and social media. We have learned from their experience to manage a case that can withstand First Amendment protections, but also thread the line to be sure that we protect our young people. And another example where social media has really been pervasive is street takeovers. We have found that social media has been a major proponent of getting crowds and inciting that kind of a gathering. So again, it increases, they're good in social media, but nevertheless, in the wrong hands, it can create tremendous havoc and danger to our communities.
And really quickly, our last question here, you brought up laws in other states and even in other countries, you know. So if we're seeing a conversation happen on the national level here in the United States as well, but we're still seeing this happen at the state level, if people are watching this, why is it so important to still have laws in Connecticut at the state level if there might be things going on from our federal lawmakers too?
Well, I think it has to go hand in hand. Okay. You have heard where the federal is taking some issues with this, and the Supreme Court has determined some cases in making decisions on it. But ultimately, as state policymakers, we can make sure that we stand on the foundation of First Amendment protection and ability for businesses to do what they do. But you can't cross the line in violating people's privacy and selling that in the open marketplace. But ultimately, I think it comes down to personal common sense. And for parents of young people, you have to take on the responsibility to ensure that there is a reasonable guideline in management of that social media access. It should not be the end-all for your communications. I think it comes down to, again, transparency, accountability from a policy-making standpoint, but also from a personal conduct. Social responsibility and personal responsibility has to be a core value as well.
Yep. And it'll be interesting, ever-changing, to see what happens and maybe what gets done next legislative session. I'm sure we'll have you back on then to talk about it. Always great to be here with you, Senator.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on with you as well.
Of course. So that does it for us on The Real Story. But if you want to watch these segments again, you can head to fox61.com or download the free Fox 61 app and watch The Real Story every Sunday at 10 a.m. right here on Fox 61 or streaming on Fox 61 Plus. Have a great rest of your morning.